continue in the series. We've had a lot of fun issuing these challenges, as Bob was explaining, and we've got a new one for you today as we look at Jesus as the greatest teacher. And to be honest, we don't even really have to debate that fact, because no matter what you believe about Jesus, this is a dude whose life and teaching, what he did and what those who followed him did in response to what he taught and did, changed history, changed everything. So he's the greatest teacher. But what does that mean for us today? And so what it made me think about was, like, who is your favorite teacher? Like, who is your favorite teacher, and why were they your favorite teacher? Think about it. Like, for me, it was Mrs. Tripoli, my 8th grade teacher, who was absolutely the meanest, greatest woman in my life, next to my mom and a few others. I mean, she was just an amazing lady who was all business. And this is what happened for me. I grew up kind of in a poor neighborhood, went to this poor school, and my junior high years were a little more awkward than the usual. I mean, I had pimples too, and I smelled kind of funny and didn't like to shower as well. But specifically in 6th and 7th grade, I had some struggles with my behavior and my performance academically. My parents were getting report cards that were terrible. All kinds of stuff was going on. So this caused concern to my parents. So they pulled me out of school, and they sent me to a charter school in the 8th grade. And there I met Mrs. Carol Tripoli. And she was awesome. At first, I didn't really like her. But what she saw in me, she would not put up with any of my junk. And she saw potential, and so she just kept raising the bar and kept challenging me. And it was like I could never do enough, and yet I wanted to. And she drew and pulled out of me so many great things, and she just became a great, great friend in my life. A lady that when I would go on to high school, I'd have a day off, I'd go back and have lunch with Mrs. Tripoli. She would come down to my sporting events in high school. She was at my wedding. And my own boys have been able to meet her when we'll go back home to Colorado to visit, because she's such an amazing lady. So for you, who is your favorite teacher and why? Now, do me a favor. Look to the person next to you and tell them the name of your favorite teacher and tell them why. Real quick. Go ahead. Meet somebody or tell the person you came with. Who is your favorite teacher and why? All right, now think of this. However many names you said, think of whoever your favorite teacher was, or maybe you had a bunch of them, but the large majority of the teachers you've had in life, you've forgotten their names. You've totally forgotten who they are. It's unlikely that your kids will really ever know them. Maybe they might hear a story, but it's even more unlikely that your grandkids or your great-grandkids would ever even hear their names. But it's interesting that you and I are here today, 2,000 years later, still talking about and being challenged by the teachings of this guy, Jesus. Something incredibly profound about him. Now again, him being a great teacher was only one aspect of his life. Just like last week we talked about this one aspect, that he was the greatest servant. And we challenged you to go out and tip in ridiculous ways these servers in our community, just to love on them. And so we have another challenge, an invitation, a church-wide call to action this week. And we happen to have the principal of Howell High School as a friend of ours. And so we asked him if we could have a little special access into Howell High School this week. Watch this.
Hey, 242, Brad here. I'm at a local high school, and we're getting ready to bless these teachers. They have no idea what's about to happen, but we're going to give them breakfast, snacks throughout the day. We're going to give them lunch. We're going to provide them with gift cards at a local coffee shop. And we're going to bring in Duncan Chiropractic's massage therapist to do chair massages throughout the day. It's going to be an awesome day of blessing. Let's go check it out.
Hey, 242, thank you so much for the treats and massages today. It really helped all of us teachers get back into the swing of things after spring break and revived our spirits. So thank you from Rose O'Reilly and the rest of the staff.
This is Rod Bushy. I'm a teacher here at Howell High School, and I want to give a shout out to 242 for providing a nice spread here for breaks and for lunch for the teachers the day after spring break. I appreciate your reaching out to the community and what you mean to our community. Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Margaret Adrian. I'm one of the assistant principals here, and I just want to thank everybody at 242 for this awesome gift of coming back on Monday after spring break with all this food and attention and massages. It means so much to all of us. And I have my perfect example here. My secretary, the person who keeps me out of trouble, never leaves her desk saying, oh, I'll just eat my lean cuisine. And she's been up here 3 times to have cookies and massages. And you know what? Look at that smile.
You guys.
So we all really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Randy Schaefer. I've been an instructor at Howell Public Schools for 39 years. I really want to thank the 242 Church. The kindness that you extended, the massage, the flower, and everything is just so meaningful. In these days and time when people say thank you to each other and appreciation, it really touches the heart. It makes the enthusiasm come back for one. And now I'm ready to go to work with today's youth, tomorrow's leaders. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, my name is Jason Schrock. I'm the principal at Howell High School. And I just have to say, on behalf of our staff, thank you so much. Coming back after spring break, the students walk a little slower into the building, and to be honest, a lot of the staff do too, because we've just had a week off. And what a way to put a little boost in the steps. We have seen people walking around the building with smiles on their face. My email has been constantly going constant with thank yous, and what a way to come back after spring break. It's really made the day. We really appreciate the support. So thank you. On behalf of everybody at Howell High School, thank you very much.
Isn't that awesome? So we did that on behalf of you as 242 this week, but here's what we want to challenge and invite you to do. What would it look like for you to teach the teachers in your community about the love of Jesus? What would that look like this week for you to do? Maybe you're just going to send a gift basket or a gift card with your child to school. Maybe you know of a teacher in your neighborhood and you guys can do something to help them. Or, I don't know, maybe you just write a thank you card that says, hey, at church we were talking about Jesus as the great teacher, and remind me of what a great teacher you are. Or maybe you want to get together with your small group and put something together that you can drop off at the teacher's lounge. And what would it look like for you and I this week to teach the teachers of our community about the love of Jesus, how awesome he is, and how cool church is? And what would that look like? And then as you do that, share it with us this week. We'd love to hear your stories. I'd love to hear whatever you come up with, and maybe what you do will inspire other people in the community to do likewise. So share those things with us. We'd love to hear from you. Now, we're going to jump into this Jesus is the greatest teacher stuff. And when we talk about it, it's not just teachers in the academic sense. That to really understand how Jesus and why he's the greatest teacher is to first understand the great teaching culture that Jesus was born into and was brought up in. That this Jewish culture was full of great teachers. They were called rabbis. And it is hard to overstate how important the role of these great teachers was. Because these great teachers helped the Jewish people in their community understand the law, the Torah, which is the first 5 books of our Bible. And so these great teachers, they were the men who helped, they were the authority, the celebrities even, and the heroes of Jewish culture, and they helped teach and understand how to live out the law, the Torah, which was absolutely central to everything in Jewish culture. You and I, we compartmentalize things. You're at church today, you'll be at work tomorrow, you might hang out with work friends this week, and maybe some church friends in small group this week, and you might do this and do that. But in Jewish culture, everything was the law. Everything. So the law didn't just govern church things and religious things. The Torah also governed your business and your business relationships. It governed your other relationships, friendships, marriage. It governed the legal system and the courts. It governed what kind of seeds you planted. It even governed your diet, what you ate. It was central to everything in the Jewish people. And they had these great teachers who helped them understand it, to honor it, to revere it. Because in Jewish culture, following the Torah and its teachings was synonymous with following Yahweh. To know the law was to know God. To follow the law was to follow God. To love the law was to love God. They were one in the same. And these great teachers, They took the 10 commandments that God had given them through Moses, and then they turned it into 613 extra laws, extra rules. Because this is so important and so central, we got to protect it. Don't break that. So they had boundaries upon boundaries, rules that kept you from breaking other rules, that kept you from breaking other rules. It was like layers of onions or parfaits, like just complex and confusing and layered upon layer to protect people from this absolutely central and important thing. And if the Torah is this important, and if these great teachers were so important, then imagine the education system that every Jewish kid was raised in. Their entire education system was the Torah. Their education system was intense. Get this. By the age of 6 years old, a Jewish child would have memorized the entire Torah, all 5 books that start our Bibles, in memory. I struggle to get my boys, one of which is 10, to remember to lift the toilet seat in the bathroom. And these kids are memorizing the entire Torah by the age of 6. That is incredible. They had such an incredible capacity to remember. And the reason that is that everything they had, they didn't have paper and stuff. So everything was passed down in stories from memory. They were part of what's called an oral tradition. Everything was shared through story and through memory. And they had an unbelievable capacity to memorize stuff. Now, this is obviously different than you and I, isn't it? To get this, statistically, what I'm saying to you right now, 90% of it you will forget by this time tomorrow. Sad but true. That's true. So you think like everything we say in our culture, we are visual learners. We learn from what we see, which is why we put so much energy and time and effort as a church into our graphics, into our branding, into the things that you see around us. In fact, I don't know if you've maybe paid attention as much to some of the graphics of this series or the color scheme that was picked. It's on the front of your program. But for a moment, if you just picture this, which this has no meaning to it, but I'm just going to teach you about this point. The difference between a Jewish mind then and our minds now can be understood this way. If I were to move those 3 circles around just slightly, what do you immediately think of when you see this? Mickey Mouse. Why? Not because that's the right color or whatever. It's because in that simple symbol of 3 circles formed like that is packed in tons of memories that you have. Just that simple image can make you think of Mickey Mouse, but then it can make you think of parks and places, vacations that you've taken. It can more than that make you think of movies that you've seen, where you were when you saw them, characters you liked, characters you hated, whole songs that you liked, plays you were in. You could sing some of these songs right now. All of that from just a simple image. Because that is how our brains work. As visual learners, we have paper and pen and computers to store that stuff, and we learn. That's why companies spend so much money on branding and the font types that are used in marketing, because that's how we learn. That's how we remember. But in Jewish culture, it was completely different. In Jewish culture, it was all just from memory. You could say the beginning of one psalm, and people could finish it in their minds. Unbelievable. When Jesus was dying on that cross and said, my God, why have you forsaken me? He was not asking a question. He was starting the 22nd Psalm. If you have never heard that or read that, read it when you get home. It is unbelievable. It's a prophecy about who the Messiah will be. And he knew every Jewish person would finish the psalm that he began on that cross. It's awesome. This is how their minds worked. Unbelievable capacity to memorize stuff. And so in the Jewish culture, as students who were particularly bright and brilliant past the age of 6, they would move on to the next stage of the education system where they would put to memory the entire Old Testament. Unbelievable. When I was a kid growing up in church, I got a ribbon for memorizing all 66 names of the books of the Bible. And I didn't pronounce them all right. But that's the farthest I ever got. Like they had the whole thing memorized. This is unbelievable to understand and to fully appreciate. In fact, they had a festival during the year where they just celebrated the fact that they had the 10 Commandments and the law and how central it was to who they were as Jewish people. It was called Shavuot. And during Shavuot, they would celebrate the law. In fact, during Shavuot, particularly bright students who were excelling and doing well and knowing the law, not just memorizing the law, but knowing how to wrestle with it, how to engage it, how to debate with it, how to ask questions and honor it, they would get to stand as a young boy with their prayer shawl in front of a rabbi who would read from a tablet. Not an iPad, but a stone literal tablet where they had etched in the 10 Commandments. And the rabbi would read from the tablet, and the little boy would repeat everything the rabbi was saying. And then at the end of it, the rabbi would pour honey on the tablet, and this boy would eat the honey off of the tablet. And if that sounds weird to you, it's because it is, because we don't understand it. But back then, they didn't have candy, so honey was very, very precious. But it was like a physical representation of how precious, how sweet the law, the Torah is, that you want to consume it, you want to internalize it, you want it to be memorized in a part of your heart because you can draw from it to navigate all of life's gray areas and ambiguity. In fact, in one of the Psalms, they write about just this. In Psalms 119, it said that I have kept my feet from every evil path, so that I might obey your word, your Torah. I have not departed from your laws, for you yourself have taught me. How sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. The Torah is sweet. The Torah is precious. It is to be revered, it's to be internalized, it's to be a part of, because it's everything. It permeates every aspect of my life and of my society. And this education system, the culminating thing, by most accounts, when you become a preteen, you're done with education, you've memorized enough, and now you are apprenticing in the family business. And the reason that you're doing that is because the culminating thing in the Jewish education system was to essentially apply for a full ride scholarship to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and every other hard place to get into and get accepted to all of them. It was like that because you would go to a rabbi respected that you knew and say, I want to be your disciple. And if he called you to be his disciple, he would invite you to follow him. But he would only do this if he was absolutely convinced that you were the best of the best, the sharpest. He would test you and grill you, and if you could answer his questions, he would invite you to follow him, but he would only do that if he thought you could be him in every way. And when you hear about Jesus calling disciples to come follow him, this didn't happen. Rabbis didn't call people to follow him. They asked if they could follow a rabbi. Jesus does something completely different, and he goes and he calls guys who are fishing with their dad. Means they're apprenticing in the family business. Means the education system had found them wanting. They were not good enough. They weren't the brightest, the most brilliant. They weren't educated enough, and yet he calls them, and they follow with excitement. Jesus flips the whole thing. And in fact, there's this saying back then of if you got the chance to follow a rabbi who are like the celebrities and the heroes of the culture, which means you're going to become one of those. This is really, really exciting. They would say, be covered in the dust of your rabbi. And what they meant was like, follow so close behind your rabbi in step that the dust off his own shoes would cover you. Do what he does. Walk the way he walks. Talk the way he talks. Say what he says. Think what he thinks. Become him, because that's what the rabbi was inviting you to do. And here Jesus invites some not good enoughs, some unlikely men in their culture, because he believed they could be him. By extension, Jesus believes you can be him. He believes in you. He believes you can do what he did, and he invites you as the great teacher to come and to follow. And so when we come to what we talked about last week in the Easter story of this meal, I mean, these guys, they had a hard time understanding Jesus all along the way for 3 years, and then it was so confusing to them. And last week we talked about this one aspect, that he was the greatest servant, and we spoke about, the story we looked at was when he washed their feet at the last meal that he had with them. And here's how John retells that same story. But listen to what Jesus, who wants them to be mimicking of him, to be covered in his dust, says to them as the teacher. And starting in verse 13 of John 13, it says, "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you in an example that you should do as I have done. I am the great teacher. Now you do as I have taught you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than the master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Hey, I'm the teacher, John 13. Now this story continues into John 14 and 15. And in John 14, if we jump a chapter just to verse 23, John 13, I'm the teacher. John 14, he says this, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teachings. My Father will love them, and he will come to them and make our home with them. Hey, I'm the teacher. And if you love me, you'll do what I have taught you. And his disciples have been like, of course we love you. Of course we want to do that. But I'm the teacher. Do what I've taught. And then he wraps up the story by really wrapping up his entire teaching like a great teacher. He gives us cliff notes. And in chapter 15, this is what he says. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. I've chosen you that you will live a fruitful, productive life. You're going to accomplish stuff and live a life of purpose. So that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Hey, I'm the teacher. Do what I've taught. And here's what I've taught. Love each other. This is my commandment. Love each other. Your great teachers have taken 10 commandments and turned them into 613 additional laws and rules and regulations. But hey, as a great teacher, let me just summarize this whole thing for you. Just love each other. A different way he said it another time was, hey, the greatest 2 commandments are this: love God and love people. Everything hinges on this one simple idea. What I'm about to do in the Easter story, wake up every day and say, what does that kind of love require of me today? That's my teaching. I'm the teacher. Do what I've commanded. Do what I've taught you. Follow me. Now, immediately following that Easter story, we know they went through some turmoil as disciples. They thought they had joined the wrong team. He just got killed. Then he raised from the dead, and their minds are blown, and they're so excited about, like, this is amazing. Let's go after this. Let's go change the world. He really was the Messiah. Like, we thought you were the Messiah. We doubted for a minute, but now we're back with you. This is really exciting. And at the end of each of the Gospels, Jesus leaves. Can you imagine what that felt like? You're like, no, you just got back. Like, why are you leaving us? And with that emotion, listen to what he says to them at the end of Matthew 28. He says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And they're like, no, duh, you just raised from the dead. Like, we're with you. Whatever you say, we're following. Therefore, go, make disciples. You have been my disciple. I believe that you can be like me. I'm leaving. Now go. Do what I've taught. Do what I have done. Make disciples of all the nations and baptize them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. I've been the teacher. Now I'm handing it off to you. Go teach, and I'll be with you till the very end of the ages. Now, if Jesus is the greatest teacher and we are putting our faith in him, he calls you and I, he commissions you and I to be teachers as well, to be covered in his dust as we follow him. So how do we do that? The first thing we got to do, if we're going to follow the great teacher, if we're going to do what he's taught, if we're going to live to the call that he's placed on all of us to be teachers, the first thing we have to do is to teach what we're taught. Teach what you're taught, because the best way to be a great teacher is to be a great learner. So what are you learning? From whom are you learning from? Teach what you're taught. Where are you learning? Who's speaking into your life? How are you learning from Scripture? Now, yes, our minds don't work the same, but we still have a call, a commandment to treasure and to hold as precious the law, the words of God, to speak into our lives. Well, maybe what books are you reading? What other preaching and podcasts do you listen to? Who are you learning from? How are you pressing into your prayer life and talking with God and learning to commune with him, to hear him, to follow him? How are you learning? Who is someone who's been a Christian a little bit longer than you, who's speaking into your life? Who's discipling you? Who are you the student of? The way Paul talks about this, he wrote a letter to the churches that he helped plant in Corinth, and he was teaching them about this teaching thing that everyone needs to be getting taught. And so he just says this, hey guys, in 1 Corinthians 11, he says, hey, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Mimic me as I mimic Christ. Pattern your life after me as I pattern my life after Christ. Who are you patterning your life after? Who are you learning from? And the inverse of that is, who are you inviting to pattern their life after yours? Who are you inviting to mimic you, to learn from you as you learn? Barnabas taught Paul, and Paul taught Timothy, and then Paul wrote letters to Tim teaching him about this. And one of the things he said is, hey, Tim, the stuff that I've been teaching you, turn around and teach that to other people who can turn around and teach that to other people. Get this. Jesus died, handed off to his disciples this call to teach, who handed that off to their disciples, to their disciples, to their disciples. This is the multiplication and the reproduction of the kingdom of God, that 2,000 years later, you and I are sitting right here, right now, and we are the next link in the chain. As we are taught, we teach. Who are you teaching? In whose life are you investing in? And some of you, if you're like me, you'd be like, I'm not like a teacher. Like, I don't want to teach kids. Like, I'd mess them up. And like, you don't want to be a teacher. But the truth is, we all teach all the time. Educators say more lessons are caught than taught. We teach with our life. God has put a host of students around you. They don't even know they're a student of you, but they're watching the way you speak, the way you respond, the way you act, where your faith is, how you respond to situations. They work with you. They live next to you. They're in your family. Who are you teaching? And if you're a parent, you know this happens and you're like, oh, oops. Like, I didn't mean to teach my kid that. Have you ever had that moment where like they said something and you're like, who taught you that? And you're like, oops, me. Because I didn't teach you that. I just modeled that and then you did that and now I feel like a terrible parent. Does that happen to you? Well, my wife and I laughed this week. We thought of a really funny example of this. My boys, they're pastors' kids, and unfortunately there's a stereotype that pastor kids are kind of weird, or they're rebellious, or whatever. We're trying not to let that happen, but you still kind of just can't protect them because they grow up in this world around stuff like this, and like they think this is normal, that we have this church that just grows and cool things happen, and so like that's what they want to be when they grow up. And so my wife one day caught my kids playing a game that I can almost guarantee your kids have never played, this game. All right, like kids pretend, but I bet your kids have never pretended to play this game. So she catches them playing this game, so she starts to record it. And I'm sitting in a meeting here at the church doing church stuff, and she sends me this video, and here's what she found them doing.
I'm a teaching pastor, and I got to 300 class, and he doesn't know that in your heart, I love Jesus. In my soul, I give him my soul. Daddy.
You're being Daddy?
Dada. We're from 242. We sing a lot and we love Jesus. Yes. For our God in our soul. Yes, in our soul. And we love it.
So super cute, obviously. That was not my kid's number that got put up there. That was one of yours. But so cute. And what I didn't know until I saw that video again this week, because that was actually a couple of years ago, that my middle child is like, he's kind of Pentecostal. He's got his charismatic stuff in him. He's getting dirty and excited and just wanting to preach. But we teach all the time. Our kids, our neighbors, people are watching what we do. So the call of Jesus is not to say if you like teaching, but to recognize that everything we do, our life is our sermon. We all preach. So teach what you're taught. Be a good learner. Be intentional with what you're teaching. The second thing you and I have to do to live out this call is that we would teach the truth. Now that seems like a no duh. I mean, we all know you could have a teacher who's super funny, really loving and caring, but if they're not teaching the truth, they are not a good teacher. And Jesus did not shy away from teaching the truth, from pushing buttons, from teaching things that were really hard for his hearers then and still now to hear. Jesus was constantly honoring Scripture and holding it in high regard. He would draw from the Torah and the Old Testament to teach people and to push them about absolutes. And then his followers, so inspired by what he was teaching, began to put down and pen what he was saying. Later, Paul would write that all Scripture is God-breathed. All of it is inspired, and it's all useful. All of it is useful for us to teach, to rebuke, to challenge, to correct, that we would all be trained up in righteousness to honor the Torah in our relationship with God. Jesus taught the truth. And he holds up for us, this is so important, that we would understand that the center of our faith is not the Torah anymore. The center of our faith is no longer a book or this thing. The center of our faith is people who have been changed by an event at the death and the resurrection of Jesus. But we continue to look to his teaching, to his followers, and to the law that he pulled from to guide us because it promises to be his words for you and I. In fact, he promises that this will read you in return to you reading it. That this becomes the litmus test that deciphers between my opinion and yours. It becomes like a lamp to our feet that guides us on the path to understand this life, to how to really live, to how really to live in response to what Jesus did on that cross, to ask ourselves, what does that kind of love require of me today? Jesus taught the truth. Now, Jesus taught a lot of things that we like, that weren't really hard teachings. He taught us not to be judgmental. We love that. He taught us that God was love and God was full of grace. And he taught us all these amazing things that aren't really that hard, but he taught a lot of things that were really hard. He taught us to love our enemies. And we're a few degrees removed from what that sounded like to the people he first said it to, who were living in their promised land that was occupied by a pagan emperor who had probably killed some of their very own family members. And he says, love your enemies. There were times that his own disciples who were bought in were like, this is a really hard teaching. I'm not sure if I'm following this guy anymore. Like, it was hard to wrestle with. He taught things like marriage is between a man and a woman. He taught that sex is only for the covenant of marriage between a man and a woman. He taught that you're to die to yourself, to lay down your life, to serve the poor. He taught some hard stuff. And the hardest of them all is the claim that he made about who he was. In John 14, John wrote it down, what he said. Jesus said this, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Sounds kind of narrow. Sounds a little closed-minded. And Jesus goes, yep, because I don't want you to confuse me with some other great teacher. I'm not some great moral man. He didn't come here to inspire Gandhi to do what he did. It's cool what Gandhi did. In fact, he didn't even come here to inspire Martin Luther King to do what he did. He didn't come here to teach us about moral truths. He came here to be our salvation, the truth, the life, and the way to the Father. And so he left no room for you and I to think anything else about him. But do we believe that he is that? He's the great teacher. And you and I just have to choose. Do we believe that he is the truth, the life, and the way? Or not? And out of that belief, we learn to either become a great teacher in following, or we go a different way and find some other different solution, but he leaves no room for in between. I love that about him, even though it's kind of hard. And on all of our journeys, we have to grapple with these harder truths that Jesus taught, the claims that he made. And really important, I think Jesus modeled this well, and then he would say to you and I, hey, you got to get a hold of the truth, find the truth, and don't be a jerk about it. You ever met someone who's got the truth and they're right, but they're wrong in every way they go about doing it? And it's like they're claiming one thing, like the love of Jesus, but they're in every way dismantling the love of Jesus and communicating the opposite of that. The Bible told us not to be like that. Hey, get the truth, teach the truth, but be gentle, be respectful, be patient. Don't be a jerk. This is the way Peter said it in 1 Peter 3. But in our hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer. Speak the truth, he's saying. To everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. That if someone comes against you and your narrow focus on your belief that Jesus is the way, the truth, and life, they will be put to shame because they can go, you've not been a jerk about it. You've been gentle, patient, respectful, and you leave it to them to decide what they believe. You cannot mandate it. You can't legislate it. We just live in response to it, and we invite the world to learn from it. Follow us as we follow him. So we got to teach what we're taught. We got to teach the truth. And then the last thing, we have to teach through typification. And I laugh because that's the dumbest word I could think of that started with a T, because we all know good teaching starts with alliteration. So I alliterated all that for you, taught, truth, typification. Typification is actually a real word. It means to model. This is important, though. If we're going to teach, if we realize that people are watching us, we must teach by walking what we talk, by being an example, by modeling it, by typifying it. It's a vocabulary word for you to use this week at some point. You get bonus points. Think about it this way. Jesus didn't just call us to something with his words. He did something with his actions. He walked his talk. In fact, it wasn't his talk that saved us on the cross, was it? It was what he did. It's where he walked. It's what he carried while he walked there. It's what he lived out and what he invites us to be like with our life. Paul, so moved by this, was planting churches and changing people's lives. And he said this in Philippians 2. He said, hey, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ. The greatest teacher, you and I, in every relationship we have the mindset of Christ, who being the very nature of God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but rather made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself, and he became obedient to death, even death on a cross, and he invites us to do likewise. He's the greatest teacher. He taught the most simple truths that are so profound that we can live the rest of our lives just trying to figure out how to love our neighbors as much as we love ourselves. This is my commandment. Love each other. Live in response to my love for you. Change the world. Be the link in the chain that takes what you're being taught and teach others. Teach them with your life.